You already know something is wrong long before your mind gives it a name. Your body notices first, a tightening in the chest, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a strange fatigue that appears after certain conversations even when no conflict has occurred. You tell yourself nothing happened, yet something in you has been quietly violated. This is not imagination. It is perception operating beneath language. Manipulation is rarely loud. It does not announce itself. It slips past the conscious mind by speaking directly to the parts of you that were shaped before you learned how to think. A manipulative person does not begin by controlling you. They begin by studying what already controls you. They sense the fractures in your identity the way a predator senses imbalance in a herd. They do not need to know your story, your posture, your hesitations, the way you apologize for existing, the way your eyes search for approval. These are confessions your body makes without your consent. The unconscious is always speaking, and those who live from their shadow learn how to listen. The first sign is not what they say, but how safe you feel being silent around them. Pay attention to that. Silence is where truth lives. Around a manipulative person, silence becomes uncomfortable, even threatening. You feel an invisible pressure to fill the space, to explain yourself, to justify emotions you have not yet felt. This is not accidental. They create an atmosphere where your nervous system feels slightly off balance, where stillness feels like danger. In this state, you become suggestible. Your mind searches for relief, and relief arrives in the form of compliance. Manipulation works because it does not fight your will. It bypasses it. A manipulative person mirrors your surface while opposing your depth. They reflect your words, your values, your ideals, but something essential never quite aligns. You feel understood intellectually, yet unseen emotionally. This split creates confusion, and confusion weakens discernment. When the mind cannot resolve contradiction, it defers judgment. It waits, and in waiting, it yields ground. They often appear calm when you are emotional, and emotional when you are calm. This reversal is not empathy, it is regulation theft. Your nervous system begins to entrain to theirs. You find yourself questioning your reactions, minimizing your instincts, dulling your responses. Slowly, you abandon your inner authority, not because they demanded it, but because maintaining it feels exhausting in their presence. This is where the shadow enters. A manipulative person is intimately acquainted with their own darkness, but only as a tool, not as a truth. They have learned how to repress guilt, how to anesthetize shame, how to sever feeling from action. This gives them a dangerous advantage. While you hesitate because you feel, they act because they do not, or rather, because they have buried feeling so deeply it no longer interferes. But repression does not eliminate the shadow, it sharpens it. What they cannot feel in themselves, they evoke in you: anxiety, self-doubt, longing, guilt. These are not random emotions, they are displaced contents of another psyche. When you leave an interaction feeling strangely diminished, ask yourself this: did something leave me or did something enter me? The unconscious exchange between two people is always more significant than the conscious one. Words are negotiable. Physiology is not. Your body responds to threat before your mind constructs meaning. That subtle contraction in your stomach, the shallow breathing, the impulse to placate, these are ancient survival responses. The manipulative person does not create them. They activate what is already stored in you. Trauma is not memory. Trauma is pattern. It lives in the musculature, in the breath, in the way your voice softens when you fear disapproval. A manipulative person senses these patterns instinctively. They do not need to be cruel. They only need to be inconsistent. Warmth followed by withdrawal. Approval followed by ambiguity. Presence followed by absence. The nervous system, desperate for coherence, begins to chase resolution. You call this attachment. Your body calls it survival. One of the clearest signs of manipulation is how quickly you abandon complexity around them. You become simpler. You speak less precisely. You doubt your perceptions. You begin to accept explanations that once would have insulted your intelligence. This is not because you have become weaker, but because your energy is being redirected toward emotional regulation instead of truth-seeking. Manipulative people thrive in ambiguity. They avoid clarity not because they lack it, but because clarity would restore your agency. Notice how often conversations end without resolution, how questions dissolve into feelings, how concerns are reframed as misunderstandings. This is not confusion, it is strategy. The unconscious mind seeks closure. When it cannot find it, it creates stories. And those stories rarely favor you. They rarely attack you directly. Direct conflict awakens boundaries. Instead, they erode them. Small dismissals, gentle corrections, subtle invalidations wrapped in concern. You're too sensitive, you're overthinking. That's not what I meant. Each phrase seems harmless, yet together they form a net. Over time, you stop trusting your emotional signals. You begin outsourcing reality. This is the most dangerous form of control when you participate in your own disappearance. A manipulative person often presents themselves as necessary, not dominant, but indispensable. They position themselves as the interpreter of your experience, the translator of your emotions, the stabilizer of your chaos. You begin to feel that without them, you would lose coherence. This is not love. It is psychological dependency disguised as connection. Observe how your body reacts to the idea of confronting them. Does your chest tighten? Does your mind generate 1,000 reasons to delay? Fear here is not proof of danger, it is evidence of conditioning. Your system has learned that self-expression in this context leads to withdrawal, punishment, or emotional loss, so it chooses silence, and silence becomes habit. The manipulative person rarely appears monstrous. They appear wounded, misunderstood, even fragile. This is not always conscious deception. Many have learned that vulnerability disarms scrutiny. By presenting themselves as broken, they invite you to suppress your anger, your clarity, your boundaries. You become the container for their unresolved pain, while your own remains untouched, unseen. This is the paradox. The more you try to understand them, the less you understand yourself. Awareness begins when you stop asking, "What do they want?" and start asking, "What happens to me around them?" The unconscious does not lie, but it does speak quietly. It speaks through tension, through fatigue, through the dull ache of self-betrayal. Manipulation is recognized by intellect alone. It is recognized by the cost it extracts from your vitality. You will know you are dealing with a manipulative person when your inner life shrinks, when your thoughts become repetitive, when your emotional range narrows, when your curiosity turns into vigilance. These are signs of a psyche under siege, not by force but by erosion. And yet, the most unsettling truth is this: manipulation only works where something in us is already fractured. Where we fear abandonment more than falsehood, where we choose harmony over honesty, where the shadow has not been faced, only avoided. The manipulative person is not merely an external threat, they are a mirror, reflecting the places where you have not yet claimed your own authority. This realization is not comforting, it is liberating, because what is seen can no longer operate unseen. The moment you begin to feel yourself again, fully, painfully, honestly, the spell weakens, not because they change, but because you do. And the body, once listened to, does not forget. They do not need to dominate you if you willingly abandon yourself. The second chapter of manipulation unfolds not through what is done to you, but through what you begin to do to yourself in their presence. This is where the process deepens, where the external influence becomes internal law. The manipulative person understands, often intuitively, that control is most effective when it no longer feels imposed, when it feels chosen. When you believe your shrinking is maturity, your silence is wisdom, your endurance is strength. The human psyche fears chaos more than captivity. Given a choice between uncertainty and familiar pain, it will choose the pain it knows. The manipulative person offers coherence at a cost you do not notice at first. They provide emotional structure, a narrative, a sense of orientation. Around them, things seem to make sense, at least superficially. But the price of this false coherence is your complexity. Notice how quickly nuance disappears. Your emotions become categorized, acceptable or excessive, reasonable or irrational, helpful or inconvenient. Slowly, you learn which parts of yourself are welcomed and which are subtly punished. This learning does not happen through force. It happens through micro-adjustments, a raised eyebrow, a pause before responding, a withdrawal of warmth. Your nervous system tracks these shifts with brutal precision. Long before your mind understands, your body adapts. This is conditioning, not connection. The manipulative person rarely tells you who to be. They simply reward the version of you that costs them the least. Over time, you become that version. You speak in ways that provoke the least resistance. You think in ways that avoid tension. You feel only what can be safely expressed. The rest does not disappear. It descends into the shadow where it accumulates pressure, and pressure always seeks release. One of the clearest indicators of manipulation is the presence of chronic self-doubt. Not the reflective kind that leads to growth, but the corrosive kind that erodes certainty. You replay conversations long after they end. You question your tone, your intent, your memory. You search for the moment where you might have misunderstood, misstepped, overreacted. This obsessive review is not introspection. It is the mind attempting to regain a sense of control after it has been destabilized. Manipulative people destabilize without appearing unstable. They often position themselves as rational, grounded, objective. In contrast, you begin to feel emotional, reactive, confused. This imbalance is not accidental. When one person claims the role of reason, the other is forced into the role of disorder. Once this dynamic is established, anything you feel can be dismissed without being addressed. Logic becomes a weapon. Calmness becomes a shield. But the psyche is not healed by logic alone. What is suppressed does not vanish. It migrates. It emerges as tension in the jaw, as heaviness in the chest, as exhaustion without cause. You may notice a strange numbness, a dulling of desire, a loss of spontaneity. These are not signs of maturity. They are signs of self-abandonment. The soul withdraws when it is repeatedly told it is too much. The manipulative person often appears unaffected by emotional complexity because they have learned to dissociate from it. Dissociation is not strength. It is a survival strategy formed in envy. Moments where feeling was dangerous. But when dissociation is rewarded, it becomes identity. Such individuals confuse emotional absence with clarity. They confuse control with depth, and they will quietly expect you to do the same. Another sign emerges in how conflict is handled, or rather, avoided. Healthy conflict clarifies boundaries. It strengthens differentiation. Manipulative dynamics blur boundaries by making conflict feel futile or dangerous. Every attempt at resolution turns into circular dialogue. Issues are acknowledged but never integrated. Apologies are vague. Accountability is diffused. You leave conversations feeling heard but unchanged, engaged but unresolved. This unresolved state is crucial. The unconscious seeks completion. When completion is denied, it remains attached. You think about what you should have said, what you will say next time, how you can explain it better. Your psyche stays tethered, not because of love, but because of unfinished business. This is how emotional captivity forms, not through chains, but through loops. Pay attention to how often your needs are reframed as problems. When you express discomfort, it becomes an inconvenience. When you express hurt, it becomes an accusation. When you seek clarity, it becomes pressure. This reversal trains you to suppress legitimate signals. Over time, you stop bringing things up, not because they no longer matter, but because the cost of expression outweighs the relief. This is where fear becomes embodied. Your body learns that honesty leads to rupture, that authenticity threatens connection, that being fully present risks abandonment. These lessons sink deep, bypassing reason. Even when you know something is wrong, you feel unable to act. Paralysis sets in, not because you are weak, but because your nervous system is prioritizing attachment over truth. This is an ancient conflict. The human infant survives through connection. To lose the bond is to risk annihilation. Manipulative people, consciously or unconsciously, activate this primitive fear. They become the emotional reference point. Their approval regulates your sense of safety. Their withdrawal triggers panic. You begin to monitor their moods, anticipate their reactions, adjust yourself accordingly. This hypervigilance masquerades as care, but it is fear wearing the mask of loyalty. The shadow grows in silence. As you suppress anger, resentment accumulates. As you deny grief, numbness expands. As you override intuition, confusion deepens. Eventually, these disowned parts seek expression. Sometimes they emerge as sudden outbursts, sometimes as depression, sometimes as physical illness. The body speaks when the psyche is ignored. Manipulative people often provoke reactions they can later condemn. They push gently, subtly, until something breaks. Then they point to the break as evidence of your instability. This reinforces the dynamic. They are calm, you are reactive. They are reasonable, you are emotio. Null. The trap tightens, yet there is a moment, often quiet, often lonely, when something shifts. You notice that you are no longer growing, that your inner world has become smaller, that your thoughts orbit another person instead of your own becoming. This realization is painful because it reveals a truth you have avoided. You have been complicit in your own diminishment, not out of weakness, out of fear. Awareness does not arrive as empowerment. It arrives as grief. Grief for the parts of yourself you silenced, for the truths you swallowed, for the instincts you betrayed. This grief is not pathology. It is the beginning of integration. The manipulative person senses this shift before you articulate it. They feel the loosening of control. Often their behavior intensifies. They may become more charming, more wounded, more distant, or more critical. This is not change. It is recalibration. The system is trying to restore equilibrium. But once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The question is no longer whether they are manipulative. The question becomes whether you are willing to reclaim the parts of yourself that learn to disappear for the sake of connection. This reclamation is not dramatic. It is quiet. It begins with listening to discomfort instead of explaining it away, with honoring fatigue instead of rationalizing it, with trusting the body when the mind is uncertain. Manipulation loses its power when you stop negotiating with your own perception. And in that moment, something ancient awakens. Not confidence, not certainty, but a deeper alignment, a return to inner authority. The realization that connection built on self-erasure is not safety, but exile. This awareness is heavy. It isolates before it liberates. But it is real, and reality, once faced, begins its work whether you are ready or not. At a certain depth, the question is no longer how to spot a manipulative person. The real question becomes why the psyche tolerated the erosion for so long. This is where the journey ends, not with accusation, but with confrontation of the self. Manipulation cannot be fully understood as an external phenomenon alone. It is an encounter between two inner worlds, each carrying its own wounds, strategies, and unintegrated shadows. One learns to control in order to survive. The other learns to submit in order to belong. Neither story begins with malice. Both begin with fear. The manipulative person is shaped by an early realization that power replaces safety when safety is absent. Somewhere in their past, authenticity failed them. Vulnerability was punished. Dependence led to pain, and so the psyche adapted. It learned to manage instead of feel, to anticipate instead of trust, to dominate the emotional field rather than risk being consumed by it. Over time, this adaptation hardened into identity. They no longer experience themselves as manipulating. They experience themselves as surviving. This is what makes them dangerous, not Beck. They are evil, but because they are unconscious. What remains unconscious does not ask for consent. It acts through us, not with us. The manipulative person does not wake each morning intending to hollow others out, but their unresolved shadow demands expression, and it finds that expression in subtle control, emotional distortion, and psychological asymmetry. They export their inner chaos into others so they do not have to face it themselves. And you, on the other side of this dynamic, carry a complementary wound. Perhaps you learned early that love must be earned, that harmony requires self-erasure, that being needed is safer than being known. These lessons carve pathways in the nervous system. They shape instinct long before reason develops. So when you encounter someone who offers intensity, focus, and a sense of importance, your body recognizes it as familiarity, not danger. This is the most unsettling truth. What feels like chemistry is often trauma recognizing itself. The end of manipulation does not arrive through exposure alone. You can name every tactic and still remain trapped. Freedom begins when you turn inward and ask the question most people avoid: what part of me learned to survive by disappearing? This question does not yield immediate answers. It yields sensations, grief in the chest, tightness in the throat, a deep, wordless sadness. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of contact. You are touching the place where the split occurred, the moment where authenticity was sacrificed for attachment. Here, the shadow waits. The shadow is not the manipulative person. The shadow is your unexpressed anger, your denied clarity, your buried refusal. It is the voice that knew something was wrong long before you admitted it. It is the part of you that watched silently as your boundaries dissolved. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming cruel or cold. It means reclaiming the capacity to say no without guilt, to feel anger without shame, to stand alone without panic. This integration is slow. It cannot be rushed without becoming another form of violence against the self. As awareness deepens, something subtle changes. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop seeking permission for your perceptions. You stop negotiating with discomfort. Your body begins to relax, not because the world is safer, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself within it. Manipulative people sense this shift immediately. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of losing warmth. What they are truly sensing is the collapse of access. The unconscious doors that once stood open are closing, not in hostility but in sovereignty. You are no longer available for extraction, and here lies the final recognition. A manipulative person cannot exist without a counterpart willing to doubt themselves. When self-trust returns, the dynamic starves. There is no confrontation necessary, no dramatic severing. Often the connection simply withers. Control requires participation. Confusion requires self-betrayal. When these are withdrawn, the illusion dissolves. What remains afterward is not triumph, but quiet. A quiet that can feel lonely at first. The noise of psychological entanglement fades, and you are left with yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your unresolved grief. This is where many retreat. It is tempting to return to familiar distortion rather than face the rawness of individuation. But if you remain, something profound occurs. You begin to feel whole in a way that is not dependent on being mirrored, needed, or validated. Your identity thickens. Your inner world regains depth. You discover that clarity is not cruel, and boundaries are not abandonment. You learn that love, which requires self-erasure, was never love, only survival reenacting itself. This is not a happy ending. It is a truthful one. The capacity to spot manipulation is not a skill acquired by sharpening suspicion. It is a byproduct of self-integration. When you are aligned within yourself, distortion becomes obvious, not intellectually, but viscerally. Your body no longer tolerates what your mind once rationalized, and so the work completes itself quietly, not with certainty, but with grounded presence, not with judgment, but with discernment. You no longer ask whether someone is manipulating you. You feel whether you are shrinking, And when shrinking begins, you listen. Because the self that listens does not disappear. It remains, and what remains can no longer be controlled,